Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 220. I'll apologize in advance. It's a bit of a doozy because there's a lot to cover. Some of that is because I gave you all last class to work, so such is life. I still think it's doable, though. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. So I think it's doable, and we're going to give it our best shot. If we get to the end and I feel like it's been too much, I might take a piece of it and attach it to the next one as we go forward. So that does have a tendency to happen. So first thing as we start, I want to talk through kind of the general file organization that you're going to be following. So you're already started on that anyway, but we should have a file that is like your base file with the architecture. So in this case, this is my base file. It has my building in it. It has the various components of the building. You'll notice that some of it I haven't worried too much about. Like, for example, these walls extend down into the earth in indeterminate amount. That will integrate with the topography. Likewise, this wall kind of heads off in one direction. I've integrated this a few times before, so I'm ahead of the curve a little bit on some of this stuff. But I know the bulk of the backside here is going to be covered up with dirt as well, so I've limited the window exposures, where the front side obviously has a lot more exposure as part of it. Your file ultimately is going to end up looking along these lines, where you have these pieces that integrate to the site, even though the site's not really there. Remember, this file is distinctly separate from the site. So we're going to take this and we're going to drop it into the site, not the other way around. So it's really important that you guys make sure that's in your head as the references go. Before I start to drop it in, I want to look at my layer structure and make sure it's nice and clean. And so here I have an artist's retreat, big layer. And then below that, I have an interior layer with a bunch of interior stuff. I have an exterior layer. I have something for some windows, and I have something for landscape. There's a layer here called construction. I tend to use that as like a default layer when I'm drawing. So it just has lines and miscellaneous stuff on it. Below that, there are a bunch of grayed out layers. These are all referenced objects. They're actually not in here anymore, and I could get rid of them. Well, no, I have to unload the blocks to get rid of them. These are referenced to blocks that I had previously brought in. The blocks aren't there anymore, so I could get rid of those. They will show up like this. The reason, though, to be aware is when we bring in furniture, when we bring in extra objects of any type, they'll show up in this file, and we'll be bringing them in as blocks into this base building file. Okay? The only time it gets a little weird is with lights, because V-Ray lights can't be in a block. And so we'll have to manually set up the lights later. But I'll explain that, and they will be in the final file. They'll be in the site file. So I have this file. I've organized my layers, and I'll make sure that I save it. Your material should be applied in this file. So all your material should be in there. All your details should be in here. I'm trying to think what else is important. I don't know, but we'll come back and revisit this. The advantage of using this system with the blocks is that you make a change to the building, it suddenly goes into your final file. And it also keeps them separate so that it's not too much overhead on the computer to be running all of it at once. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And the next piece of the puzzle is I need to create that site file to begin with. And so I'll just go create a new large object, inches. There it is. I want to make sure that my units are in inches. Perfect. And then I need to bring in the site. So I've already downloaded the site information from the course website. Here's assignment 205 at the bottom. There's a zip file. So I've already extracted it. It's on my flash drive. I'm going to go to File and then Insert. Import. Because I actually want this not as a reference. I want this embedded within it. Let me go into... I've switched from using the exercise folders to the assignment folder here. That's why it's in 205. And I'm going to look at the site information, and there's my SketchUp file. I believe this one is the coast. That's the one I'm going to use for this project. We're going to bring it in, and it's going to show up as a mesh. Here it is. I do not need the little person standing there, so that person can go away. And we'll zoom out a bit so we can see the site. Okay, there it is. I don't need this flat terrain anymore, so we'll make that go away. And I do need to create a NURB surface of this because I want to smooth things out and I want to be able to work with this down the road. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing that we did before. I'll move through it rather quickly because you guys have seen me do this multiple times. I'm going to create a layer for the Google terrain. And I'll take all the Google stuff and I'll put it on that layer. I'll create or rename a layer for contour X. I could also do contour Y. I'm going to do them all on one layer to save the layer. Ultimately, I'll just delete them anyway. We'll do a contour of the mesh. Turn on vertex here so I can snap to the end. There we go. We'll go off in this direction. I'm guessing 100 feet. No, maybe a little less, 75. Maybe 50. There we go. Looks about right. I'm going to make sure that I contour the terrain, not the lines, so I don't get all the dots. And we'll go in this direction. Same thing, 50 feet. There we go. Now I can turn off the Google terrain layer, and I'm left with just the grid. We need to do that cleanup. So I'll do some trimming. And we'll get rid of the outside boundaries. Perfect. And then I'm going to make this into that network surface. So we'll go up to Surface, Network Surface, if I can find it. Or you could just type in, oh, it's called Curve Network. Yeah, backwards and forwards. Network Surface is the command line for it. Defaults are fine. We'll let it go. Remember, this can take a few minutes. Perfect. I'm going to select the surface itself, and I'm going to rebuild it. The minimum would be 100 by 100. I'm going to do a little bit less. We'll do 75 by 75. And now I have a nice, relatively smooth surface. Remember, I could rebuild it and smooth it out a little bit more if I wanted to. I'm going to take the surface and move it onto a new layer. Go to Change Object Layer. I'm going to rename this to Terrain. And then I'm going to start cleaning things up. So I don't need the Contour X layer anymore. Oops, that was not what I wanted to do. And we can get rid of those. Nor do I really need the Google Terrain layers anymore. You can choose to leave it if you want. It won't hurt anything, but recognize you can actually go in and delete it. Now that I have this particular piece available to me, it's time to start thinking about putting my building into this site. And so let me get rid of these two layers. I'm going to rename the default layer to be called blocks. I'll make it active so that when I bring in my object, it'll show up on the blocks layer. I'll go to File, or excuse me, Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I now need to go find that original file. So this is going to be where I'm looking for my retreat. Now, I'm not looking for SketchUp at this point. I'm actually looking for my Rhino file, which should be at the very top. There you go. And there's my base for this year, or this semester. And I'll go ahead and say Open. There's a little preview of it. Looks pretty good. We'll say OK. Now here, remember, we're going to link this, and we're also going to reference the layers. So both are important. It's a linked block definition, and it's a referenced layer style. So I'll go ahead and say OK. This is going to pop up very, very frequently. It has to do with materials and whether you want to override your materials or not. Generally speaking, always update or replace your existing material and apply all. make sure you have the most recent version of your materials. And at this point, as I zoom in here, I see my building. And I want to think about where it's going to be positioned. And so I've kind of always been thinking that this belongs in one of these nested little kind of corner alcoves right there, kind of on the side. That's my vision for this. So if I drop it in here, it'll end up being kind of close to where I want it to be. But chances are it's going to be too low or too high, or the placement's not going to be quite right. So I've specified that the block is inserted, but I can't really, it's not quite right yet. So I need to do some manipulations first. So we'll start with moving, and I'm going to look at this a little bit high here. And as I look at it, it's like, okay, well, it's starting to feel like it belongs in the site a little bit. I probably need to move this vertically, so I'll type move and then V for vertical. And we'll bring it up a little bit. And as I'm doing this, I'm going to have to keep working my way around the building to see, does it fit? And it looks like it's almost fitting, except it doesn't quite fit my windows back here. So at this point, I can move my building up a little bit more, or I could go back and fix my windows. It's kind of a backwards and forwards thing. You have to decide what part you're going to do. I'm going to move this up just a little bit more. Up a little too high. Let me move it vertically down. Yeah, that looks pretty good there. Looks pretty good on that side. Oh, I'm having a little problem here because my terrain goes all the way in. Now, this is a pretty good one, because maybe you don't want to just cut it out and have the whole thing sticking there. If I wanted this to not happen, I could keep moving the building up, but at some point it's going to feel like it's up on a tower or up on some kind of a pedestal. And so you have to figure out what's the right happy medium with how this balances in. So let's start first by saying, okay, I want to cut out this terrain so that it doesn't go through my building anymore. I have a little bit of a problem right at this joint too. So in order to solve this a little bit better, so that I don't have to manipulate this, I am going to move it up slightly. So let me move it up. I just want that to go under that particular piece because I don't want to have to deal with this. Okay, so now I need to figure out, how do I cut this particular piece out? So if I switch over into the top view and we look down on my object and I start working on a layer, I'm going to create a new layer. I told you I like a layer called construction. It gives me a layer to be working on, essentially, that doesn't count for anything. And what I'll do is I'll use the polyline tool, and I'm simply going to trace around the outline of my building. So I'll zoom in here a little bit. And I'll work my way around my building. Oops, too far. Okay, so I've created a closed polyline right there. And if I look at this, oops, let me turn off the terrain layer. If I look at it, it's not at all coplanar, right? So that's a problem, except that I remember back to the fact that we can use the project command. So I'll go into the top view like this, and I'll type project. And I'm going to project that line onto this surface, which gives me a wonderful little place to begin and cut out. So I'll use that. I'll type trim, and we can get rid of that section really clean and easy. So that's pretty good. So I don't, however, quite have this piece integrated just yet. So this is where I need to do some manipulation of the existing terrain. So let me take a line, and I'll draw a line from here kind of over to there. And you know what? I kind of like it better. Let me go back. I'm going to untrim for just a second because I don't want quite all of that cut out. So let me create one more line more over in there. And I'm going to do one more projection of that line onto this surface, just so that it doesn't quite go back so far. All right, then I'll do trim again, and I'll get rid of this piece. Now it doesn't go quite as far up the hill. It gives me a little bit easier time dealing with it. Okay, so here I am. I've got that little cutout. I need to remanipulate this piece of terrain. So I'll go and create a polyline that goes from here straight across to there, which gives me the back side of this particular piece of terrain. Let me take this curve and again go into the top view and type project onto that surface, trim, and I can get rid of that piece of the terrain. Okay, so that's good, but I really need some more curves to define the replacement shape. And so I could do it as simple as a few corner points and just have a stretching surface. Sometimes it's nice to have a little bit more, contour to your terrain. It's a preference for you. So first thing I'll do is I'm going to, let me make this a little bit bigger here. I'm going to duplicate the underside edge so that I can offset down a given distance. So let me dupe edge of, no, it's not going to let me do it, so I'll have to draw it. Go from right there to right there to right there. Take that piece and I'm going to offset it. I don't want it going to the side, so I'm going to change the in-C plane. Nope. I'm going to change my view so that it's going down. And my distance, 5.5 is fine. All right, so now I have those two lines, and they can be relatively straight. If I'm going to draw a nice graceful line up here, it wouldn't hurt me to switch my C-plane so I can just draw it on the surface of this building. So I'm kind of combining lots of different things. So you see when we get to this stage, I'm taking pieces of lots of different lectures and saying, oh, you just do this and then you do that, right? So let me switch the C-plane to 3 points. There, there. And I'll make my life easy and snap to those points. Then I can use this curve interpolate points to go from right there. Let me turn off ortho. And it just gives me a little bit more flexibility in this surface. So there's that curve. I already have a curve that's on the edge of this surface. So I have that plus that. But I need this to end up coming down a little bit more. So let me go ahead and just turn points on. Actually, I'm trying to think here what's the best strategy. So I think I'm going to take this curve that's coplanar and I'm going to work my way down to that point. Yeah, I think that's the easiest thing. So I have this curve there. I need a few more. Let me duplicate that edge and that edge. I'll join those for a second. I need to know the point that this intersects this wall. So let me take these and type intersect. It might be too aggressive. Oh, but I did get the point. Perfect. So then I can go from this point down to a perpendicular right there. Actually, let me go a little bit broader. from that point. I'm going to use my near snap, which I almost never use, just so that I can get a little bit further down this line. All right, a couple more trims and then we'll get there. Trim. I thought that was... There's my line. Sorry, I got myself lost there. This line needs to go further down. It needs to go to right there. Trim. There we go. I shouldn't have joined this last little line segment there. This and this are part of the same line. There we go, plus that. Oops. I'm going to join those. So I have that line there. Oops. But I can't include that part of it. So there's one direction. There's the second direction. There's the third direction. Oh, and this didn't line up. All right, I'm going to have to redraw that line. Sorry about that. I put it in the wrong place. All right. So this plus that curve there, that curve there, that curve there, and my last curve right there. Then I can do a network surface of these. So I'll go to curve from objects, or excuse me, surface, curve network. So OK. And it will then build in the surface that I need to match up with my existing surface. I can texture map this surface and that surface together, and they'll end up being one continuous surface when I go to render. But I've essentially adapted so that my surface falls where I want it to in this section rather than following the contours. So does that make sense? Basically, I've cut it out, and then I create new boundaries, and I do a new network surface to have it tie in the way that I want it to. Having the intersection here works reasonably well. It looks like I'm going to have to clean up a little bit of an issue there, but you get the idea. Okay? So now that that's in place and I've integrated the building into the site, it's time to start setting up your ideal view of this particular scene. And so thus far, we haven't talked too much about cameras in renderings in V-Ray, but if you've been working in the default, generally the lens length, and I'm getting to that by having no object selected and then clicking on properties. And if I look down here at the properties of my camera, the lens length is set to 50 millimeters, which if you're familiar with camera terms, is kind of a semi-telephoto lens. It's pretty focused. In architectural renderings, typically we do a little bit wider angle. For interiors, we would go all the way down to maybe 18, so that we get a lot of interior shot. For exteriors, I think the magic number is about 28. You could do 35. 28 feels about right. So I'm going to go ahead and change my lens length from 50 to 28. And you'll notice that when I change to 28, the perspective changes. So here, as I look at this, this building here, let me go back to 50 for a second. See how everything's a little bit more straight? When I go to 28, oops. It gets a little bit more perspective, which works really nicely for architectural renderings. So I think about 28 feels like the right happy medium. But again, if it's something you want to play around with and you want to do more, by all means. I'm going to set my C-plane back to world top. But if I went, for example, to 18, which is great for an interior, it almost gets to be a little bit too much. You know, I have to get close enough to the object, and then it starts to get distorted. So it works great for inside spaces, but not so much for outside. So I'm going to stick with 28. And then I'm going to work on setting up a rendering view. So I want to do a render of my building. I want to be able to see a nice piece of my building. Remember, though, when we're rendering, that you have control over what's shown. So if, for example, I'm setting up a rendering, and there's a nice kind of rendering in this ballpark of this particular house looking out toward the ocean, if I have it from too far back, I'm going to have to render too much of this hillside. If, however, I tighten my view a little bit, you know, maybe in something like that, I don't have to render so much of the ugly hillside, and I get more of the expansive view. So think carefully about how you're setting up this view. Think about what are the principles of composition that would help you. Is there a strong rule of thirds, for example? If you took 135, you remember I talk about this kind of stuff, right? So is there a strong rule of thirds here? That's about a third of the way over. I get a big expanse. This is what I'm looking out at. Is this the right view? We can use the zoom in and zoom out tools, but we can also use some of the camera tools to fine-tune this. So if I go into set camera, you can see that I have some tools down here: tilt view, rotate camera, adjust lens length, and dolly. You've got a lot of flexibility here. So if I do the dolly, for example, right, you can see that I'm changing the perspective of the view. And you can see that kind of dynamically what's happening. Does that make sense? Okay, let me go back. Oops. You do. So that's under set camera, adjust lens length, and dolly. And so you can get a sense for what the right perspective is. This is useful inside because if you want to see a little bit more, you can see a little bit more. For me, I'd rather stick to my 28. But I would like to control a little bit more about the camera. So instead of doing the adjust lens length and dolly, I might just well, here, I'll show you how to see the camera. Let me go to set camera, and then I'm going to show the camera, which right here. It doesn't show it in the view that is the camera. It shows it in the other views. So this represents my camera right here. And so if I take the target, for example, I can actually move where the target is, which changes. Notice that it's staying at the same height, but it's changing the view. So I'm manipulating what the view is. I can choose how far around it's rotated. I can choose how close in it is, etc. That's under show camera. So you have, in the view, you go to set camera and then show camera. If I wanted this point to be a little bit higher, I can look at it this way, and I could say, or a little bit lower in this case. Hold on a second. Let me turn off for just a second. Turn off ortho here. It's a good idea to disable your snaps when you're manipulating the camera because you don't want to snap the camera to a particular point. So I can swing this around a little bit. I can also drop the camera so that I'm looking a little bit higher up at the building. So you get how I'm manipulating the camera in addition to this. Standard view tools still work. So pan, for example, I can get more of the building that way. I can clip off part of the building. It's a matter of what's the right perspective for you. You know, it's probably, for me, it's probably somewhere in that ballpark. Generally speaking, you want to try to stick to eye level if you can. The perspectives will always turn out better if they're more eye level perspectives than they will if they're not eye level perspectives. Once you have your view set up the way you want it, so let's say that this is the view that I want, or maybe this one, a little bit further away. I'm choosing to clip off that side of the hill so I don't have to deal with that side of the hill. Once I have this set up the way that I want it, I'm going to save the view. So I want to go to this little triangle next to perspective, and I'm going to come down to set view and then named views. And you've probably done this before already. But this is absolutely important once you get into doing these kinds of renderings, because you will make changes and then have to go back and re-render and re-render and re-render. So if you have your views set up, it's really easy. You just go back to the same view and you re-render and see how it turns out. So I'm going to call this exterior view 1. Stay away, even though you can technically type in spaces here, stay away from typing in spaces in the view names because long term it can cause problems. So exterior view 1 looks fine. It's saved. The advantage here is you move around and you come back to exterior view 1. It's always the same view. It's convenient. You may find today that you're not happy with your different views and you want to adjust and you want to change and you want to try a few different ones. Save more than one. It's no big deal. The advantage, though, is that you can always go back to the same one. So let me go back to set view, exterior view 1. There it is. I'm happy with this particular view. So now it's time to fine-tune a few more things now that we have the ideal view, and that is that we need the environment. We need all the stuff that makes this rendering look good. So I'm going to go back to layers, and on the layers here, I'll create a new main layer called environment. Underneath the environment layer, I'm going to create a sublayer for sun. I'll create another sublayer for water. And this could be infinite plane, but I'm going to call it water because it's going to end up being water. And you'll see how I'll do that in just a second. So on the sun layer, I need to insert the sun. Now, we could go through the sphere, looking down and adjusting time of day and whatever, but I also know that on the website here, there's some stuff ready for me. If I go to my resources and then Vray, we'll see quick rendering setups. And this, for me, the basic day scene 3 Malibu overlook is a particularly good one because it's Malibu and there's an ocean already, so that helps. Furthermore, I noticed that I have to download it from this website, but there's more information. And I know it says Malibu, but I did the settings for San Francisco because that's close to where you guys are doing it. It gives us a day and a time. It also says what the camera settings should be as part of this. So all this information exists. Or I can download this visopt file that will preload all the information for me. So yes, you know how to do it now, but I'm trying to make your life easier so that you can just download this stuff. OK, so let me come back in here and let's load those up. I'm going to go to my Vray Options. I'm going to load that visopt file. It should be stored in my resources folder. And it's just a matter of I have to find it. Malibu overlook. Oh, how convenient, right? Looks like I still need that visopt file. So I'm going to right click and say save link as. HDRI. Day, Malibu overlook. There we go. We'll save that. And now we should be able to load it. There it is. So it's open. One of the tricks when you're loading these is to open one of the drawers. So let's say I have the camera drawer open and I go to load it and I say yes, load it. When it's done loading, it will close all the drawers. So that way you know for sure, oh, okay, it's loaded by now. So it's just a little side tip. Let me go into environment and make sure it's actually finding the maps correctly. So I'll click on the GI Skylight map. If I preview it and I don't see anything, which I don't, it doesn't actually know where the file is, so I still have to point it together, even though all the settings are set. So let me go in to my resources. There it is. I need the overlook environment file. And now if I were to preview it, yep, I'm getting it. So that's good. I'll say OK. I'll come back to this one and make sure that this one's set up as well. There it is. And I'll say OK. The reason that these change is the file that I give you doesn't necessarily, your drive letter, the file, they don't all match. So it doesn't necessarily know where this stuff has been saved. So you have to make sure you go in and reload it. But assuming you reload the 2 image files, you should be pretty good to go. So I have both of those set. Other things have already been set for me. The shutter speed is already set at 400, which it should be. And that's part of the file that you load, the visop file. A couple other things, though. When I look at my rendering, what I see is what I want to get. So I'm going to unlock the view. I'm going to get the view aspect in case it's changed. Then I'll lock the view so that it's now locked into what I see is what's going to render. But I may decide long term to bump up this size. I'm asking you today for the minimum dimension to be 800 on the rendering that you create. If it's a big problem and it's taking too long, we can drop the size down. But for right now, that should be fairly reasonable. You may also want to go into your system and turn on the distributed rendering hosts. So we did this. Let me find my servers. Yep, I've got a few there. Remember, add them about 5 at a time. Go back and add some more. Go back and add a few more. I'm going to go ahead and resolve those servers, and then I'll say OK. Now I have those set to go as well, and that's loaded in. Okay? So all that's done and ready to go. I recommend once you have all your settings, go ahead and save the visop file for your own purposes so you can come back and reload it. So I'll go to save for the visopt. And instead of storing it in my Malibu overlook file, that's the one that gets us started, I'm actually going to store it with all of the stuff that I'm doing in my assignment folder. So I'll come in here, go to assignment 205 this semester, and I'm going to just save it in here as a backup. So this is my day visopt. No, we'll just call it day visopt. And I'll go ahead and click save. This also, long term, will allow us to go back and switch, once we have night renderings, to switch back to the day renderings and back to the night, because it'll load all the settings for us, which is important. So once all of that's done, I have the sky. I have to put the sun in. I haven't put the sun in just yet. So we'll go in and we'll insert the sun. I'm going to uncheck manual control, and I'll go down to San Francisco. There it is. Now the website told me what day and time it was. So it's 6:15 at 2:45 p.m. with daylight savings on. So I'm going to go back here. And here's my date. 6/15. And it was 2016. The date probably doesn't matter. I mean, the date itself matters, but whether it's 2016 or 2017 doesn't really make a difference. Daylight saving is on, and it was 2:45. So we'll 2:45 p.m. So there it is. It gives us our time and our day. I'll go ahead and say OK. Remember, I have to click to put the sun in the scene. I'll snap it right there to the roof so that I know where it is for later on. That should be on the sun layer, which is good. So at this point, if I were to render, I'd have the terrain kind of coming out and stopping at the edge of the rectangle. And I'd end up with sky or some picture after that point. So I really need some infinite water going along. And so the logical thing would be, oh, let me just create an infinite plane and assign water as a material to it. Unfortunately, we can't get waves as part of it, because infinite planes they won't let us have a displacement map. They're forced to be flat. So I've played around a lot with what's the best way to create a big expanse of water. Ultimately, it works really nice if we want to create a pool or something too, and we'll get to that. I will actually build a pool for you a little bit later on so you can see that. But The way that I ended up solving the problem was to give you another block to download and use. It's under Resources, and it's under the Rhino Blocks library. And if we scroll down here a little bit, there's a category called Landscape, and there's an object called the Ocean. Notice if you're working on Lake Tahoe, there's also an object called Lake Tahoe. Right, so I play fair. If I give you the ocean, I'm also going to give you Lake Tahoe. So Lake Tahoe exists as an object. Honestly, you may end up wanting to create a proxy object out of the Tahoe scene once you get it placed the way you want, because it's a pretty hefty file. There's a lot of mountains and stuff involved in that. Anyway, for mine, I'm going to use the ocean. So let me go to the ocean file. You can see what the ocean looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and download the ocean 3DM. So there it is. Let me show it in its folder, and I'm going to copy that over into my folder for today. So there it is, and I'm going to copy it in here. Okay, so there it is. There's Ocean 1. Hopefully the materials will come with it. I did include the materials. If you needed to download them, they're there. But my guess is the materials are already assigned and already included with it. So now I can go back to my site file, and I can go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And instead of the retreat base, I'm going to pick the ocean, and we'll drop this in as well. Remember, it's a linked file and with a reference layer style. We'll say OK, and we'll drop this in there as well. So what this essentially is, if we were looking at it, is it's a really, really big dinner plate. And because we can't use the infinite plane with the texture on it, my solution was to make a really large object that I could apply the texture on, which works rather nicely. The challenge, though, is sometimes we need to adjust the horizon. So instead of just having a flat disk or a really big rectangle, this actually curves up at the ends. And you'll see that when we do the renderings, some people will get a little black line as part of the renderings. We can take the water and essentially fake it and curl it up to meet the sky, wherever that sky is. So it will help you get there. Anyway, I need to move this so that it feels appropriate around my terrain. So right now the water's a little bit high. We have too much global warming going on, so the seawater rose. Anyway, we're going to move this vertically down, and you see that there's kind of a happy medium point where I'm getting about right. Obviously there's tides, so more or less of the beach, depending on how you want to do it, somewhere in right about there is probably about right. So now that I have that set, it has, let me make sure it goes on the water layer, change object layer, there we go, it's on the water layer. Now I can go back to that exterior view 1. I'll go to set view, exterior view 1, and I now have my water. I have my sky set. The last piece of the puzzle is maybe I want to do something to the actual terrain here and here as part of the rendering. And so one of the things that you'll find in rendering is that you can spend 100% of your time in V-Ray and get a great rendering. You could spend 100% of your time in Photoshop and get a great rendering. You could spend half the time using a combination of Photoshop and V-Ray and get the same rendering in half the time. So in this class, I'm not saying you have to use Photoshop, because I don't teach Photoshop as part of this class. But if you have some Photoshop skills, for example, you could use the grass brush and a little bit of grass and collage in the grass and not worry about it, which would be ideal. But if you don't have Photoshop skills, obviously I have to have a solution to show you how to do the rendering. But it takes a lot more time and it takes a lot more work to do it. So my solution is also available in the same little downloads, and it's called Bunch Grass. And it looks something like this, where we have basically grass. This grass file, let me open it up. I have it in my, sorry, it should be in Rhino Blocks. Rhino Blocks, there we go. Landscape, there we go. There's my bunch grass. Let me just open it so you can see the file. What do you mean? The site? It's whatever site you chose. I don't know which one. Look at the two, Tahoe. The SketchUp is the one you want, yeah. Okay, so anyway, what the bunch grass is it's essentially a series of intersecting planes, which you can see, that have grass applied to them with a transparency map that makes the little forks stand up on the grass. So if I were to do a rendering, and it's not registering the materials right now, so let me load those just so you can see them a little bit better. Why is it not listed here? It's always great when you can't find what you're looking for, right? All right, well, I'm going to have to figure it out. Anyway, which means that it's not going to look good once I put these in. Essentially, if I'm looking down at this object, it's not going to look good. It's not going to look like grass. But if I look at it from an angle sideways, it's going to look like grass because of the layers. So it's a way of faking grass, so to speak. This is loosely based on a flying architecture tutorial. I just adapted it for taller grass. Essentially, this object, if we bring it into our scene, though, can create actual grass. So let me jump back to my Rhino file here. Actually, I'm going to have to fix the material first. So let me download the material package. And let me extract it into my flash drive. I have no idea why it's not there. It's really bugging me. All right, there it is. Yep, good. Let me go back to that Rhino file with the grass in it and go to my materials, and I'm going to replace these materials. So I'll right-click on the material itself and choose Import Material so that I can go find that grass material. There it is. I'm not so worried about the other grass material. Thanks, Vray. And if I switch, come on. Really struggling right now. It's showing up fine in my preview, but of course it won't show up here. Anyway, the materials are set, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then let's put it into my scene itself. So I'll jump back into my Rhino scene. There it is. And I'll go ahead and insert that as a block instance. So I'll go Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I'll browse for that grass. Same style with how it comes in. And I want it to show up right there on the little hillside. So it's going to take some finesse to get it in the right place. So I might actually look at this in the top view here, and I'll move it over a little bit, and I'll move this over a little bit. It needs to overlap just a bit in this. And so at this point, if I look at it here. It's just a matter of copying and pasting this so that it runs across this particular surface. Let me move it vertically. It was just a little high. Oh, come on. Try that one more time. Just a little bit. Something like that is about right. And essentially, I can then copy this and paste it across the surface itself. You can also do an array on surface if you want to array these objects out across the surface. I feel like I'm running short on time and that I'm running low on your attention as well. So I'm gonna stop going through it. Normally I would go through the whole array. You guys don't need it just yet. I'll come back and revisit it again as you go forward. But it's a way of adding that grass to it. There are other objects that I've made for you as well. There's a group of rocks somewhere in here. Yeah, there's some rocks if you want to put some rocks in. You can also do searches for other types of objects that might be useful as we go forward. When we get to the interiors next class, no, we do lights first. Never mind. In next week, when we get to the interiors, we're going to go find furniture. We'll put that in and that sort of thing as well. Okay. So one other thing that's important, and that is that when you start to do your renderings, I'm going to go into Vray Options. I want you to turn on something for me, which will save your life down the road, especially if you bring your objects into Photoshop at all. It's under the it's right here, VFB channels. By default, you should be rendering the RGB color and alpha channels. Please also turn on some of these others. And so I would suggest at a minimum that you turn on the Z depth, which is right there. I personally really like Material ID and Render ID. I would turn those on. But Z depth is essential. Background usually is a good idea as well. And when we get into lighting, we'll turn on some of the other ones for you, the lighting and the shadow, the reflection, etc. What Vray does when we turn these on is it allows you to save multiple versions of your file with different settings. And these settings long term will help you in Photoshop because you can identify materials or backgrounds or actually add blur to your photograph after the fact or whatever. So I will walk you through those strategies later on in the semester, but now is a good time to save them. Furthermore, once you're done with your rendering, I'm going to click on render for just a second see if I can get the render frame up here so you can see it. There's an icon with one single disk, and then there's an icon with multiple disks. So here we go. That icon right there with multiple disks, that will save all the channels at once of your rendering. Go for it and make sure you use that one each time rather than the single save. Because long term, if you have all those, it'll help you out. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop this for now. I will do a rendering, but I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me do the rendering, but I'll show you at the end what it looks like. I will finish these the grass pieces so that they'll show up there as well. Goal today, obviously, keep working as much as you can. My guess is your model isn't quite as polished as mine, but I've had several years to work on my model, so it's a little unfair. But the more you get, the better off you'll be. Technically speaking, today you could actually do the first rendering of your final project. The likelihood of that happening is 0. But I'm just telling you, technically speaking, you could. Okay? But you're certainly setting up the view, and then you'll replace it. And one of the things that's important about this process is that as you get to the final and you have all these pieces and these different renderings that are required and whatever, you'll render one, and it'll be good enough for now, and you'll keep working and you'll render another one. Then this one won't be as good, so you'll go back and re-render it. And so that's part of this snowballing. You'll always have these 4 renderings that you can always replace. Make sense? Okay, so I'll stop talking. Sorry it was so long. And then you guys get to work on this sort of thing.